Next on Arizona 360, the MeToo movement and changing the culture at Arizona's capital.
I've had a lot of men come to me and say, I had an epiphany about this.
We need to rebuild the public trust in the legislature.
Plus, putting volatility in the stock market into perspective.
You never want to react to significant swings.
And how Tucson plans to keep pace with an expanding gem show.
We have a responsibility to make sure that that is an experience that people will continue to have.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thank you for joining us. What was billed as a bipartisan effort to keep the government funded still wasn't enough to prevent another partial shutdown, one though that lasted only several hours. At midnight Thursday, money from a stopgap measure ran out. Overnight, Congress did pass that bill and ended the shutdown by morning. Debate on a bill addressing DACA could soon follow.
Pleased to announce that our bipartisan bicameral negotiations on defense spending and other priorities have yielded a significant agreement.
A deal from the Senate keeps the government funded over the next 2 years and includes a $300 billion boost for the Pentagon and domestic programs, including money for community health centers for 2 years, which saw funding expire last September. And it provides even more funding for the Children's Health Insurance Program, known as CHIP, keeping it running for a decade.
No hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome here, no hate.
As for DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program,
It would be my intention to take up legislation here in the Senate that would address DACA, border security, and related issues.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he will take an existing bill and allow lawmakers to make changes related to immigration. The president wants a permanent solution to DACA by March 5th. The MeToo movement at Arizona's capital culminated with the House voting to expel State Rep Don Shooter last week. The investigation into sexual harassment complaints began a few months earlier when a fellow lawmaker accused Shooter of aggressive and brazen harassment when she joined the House in 2011. Christopher Conover reports on the changing culture at the legislature.
The clerk will record the action of the House. Mr. Shooter is expelled.
And with that, the Arizona House of Representatives made history as the first state house to remove a member of office for sexual harassment since the Me Too movement began late last year. But the work was not finished. Many were left asking, now what?
I want the public to understand we don't have protection like the corporate world has protection. There is no HR department here, and that's why we're standing here today.
We need to rebuild the public trust in the legislature. It's not unique to the legislature. This is obviously happening in other industries, in Hollywood, and the media, and even corporate America, capitals across the country. But we are elected by the people, and the people want to see their elected representatives held to the highest standards and living to that standard. And so that's going to take some time, but we need to ensure that we have policies in place that protect that.
The proof will be in the pudding, but it's not just about a policy. It's not just about a training one day. It's not just about, signing a document. You have to actually act on it.
Mia Parrish is on the faculty of the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University. Before that, she was the president and publisher of the Arizona Republic. And when allegations surfaced against Shooter, she wrote an op-ed in the paper detailing her own run-in with then-Senator Shooter. She says the changes we're witnessing in American culture feel different this time.
I think you have an opportunity right now to really make a difference. These are people's lives and livelihoods and safety and their opportunity, and that's for men and for women.
In the legislature, leaders are trying to come up with ways to ensure that happens. This week, the House passed new rules that include a requirement for writing a code of conduct, because most of the existing code has to do with financial issues, not how House members act towards the people around them at the Capitol.
When you look at a lot of other, corporate America, when they have sort of that HR manual, here's the to-dos and not to-dos, I don't see how it hurts to have that. In some ways, I'm disappointed we have to have that because we're adults and we should be expected to operate professionally and with respect to other people. But if we're not doing that, then this makes sense to be the next logical step, again, on the road to trying to rebuild the public trust.
But in the House, there still exists a problem with who to talk to.
One of the things I mentioned was clearly delineating an HR department within the House. And so that will be a process. We have some HR personnel, but and I think staff probably has a better idea of that, but when it comes to members, we could just benefit from greater clarity and greater formality in terms of HR. It's tough because unlike the corporate world, you know, where you have the person at the top who can fire anyone who's misbehaving, we obviously have to take very drastic measures to fire somebody if it's not the voters doing that.
Those who have found themselves personally involved in spurring cultural changes have advice for lawmakers and everyone else.
Standing up and speaking out is as much a part of it, and being a good partner and a good friend and a good defender, and, you know, not worrying about what other people are going to say to you. You know, do the right thing. You know, it's always the right time to do the right thing.
Sticking with a conversation around the MeToo movement, tune in Friday, March 2nd, right after Arizona 360, for a special broadcast of Frontline Weinstein. It looks at the sexual harassment and assault allegations against film producer Harvey Weinstein. And following that program, the entire 5-part series MeToo, Now What?, which goes beyond the headlines about sexual harassment and asks how we got here and how we move forward. Within the same month, the University of Arizona found itself at the center of 2 legal dilemmas, both filed by women, separately making harassment and discrimination claims. A brief timeline of the two. The first stems from allegations made by a former assistant against fired football coach Rich Rodriguez. She accuses Rodriguez of sexual assault and harassment, which he denies. Late last month, she filed a second notice of claim seeking $8.5 million against the U of A, Rodriguez, and his wife. A notice of claim is a precursor to a lawsuit. The U of A has until early March to respond, or she can file a lawsuit after that. A few days later, a former U of A honors dean sued the Arizona Board of Regents, claiming systematic discrimination against female deans at the university. Patricia McCorkadale accuses U of A officials of paying her less than her male colleagues and calls out former U of A provost Andrew Comrie for not acting on her complaints. She wants the court to force the U of A to adjust the pay for female deans to match what their male colleagues make. To explore the issues facing the university, we asked labor attorney Don Awerkamp the process for coming forward with these types of cases. He's not involved with either of these cases. However, his law firm has frequently helped U of A employees with discrimination-related claims. Oftentimes, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
Especially in sexual harassment cases, because oftentimes there's no one else there other than the 2 people involved. So you never really are able to get easy evidence in those cases, but sometimes you get 5 or 6 women saying, yeah, he did the same thing to me or something similar to me.
Do cases like these, employment cases or cases of harassment in the workplace, do they have a capacity to impact culture once these things have gone through litigation or seen their day in court?
I think gradually things are changing. I think when I first started, men that were doing this were doing it largely because they were stupid and because they saw everybody do it. I mean, it was very common, and now I think it's more a problem of people having enough power that they think it doesn't matter if it's wrong, I've got more power and I'm not going to take advantage of it. And that's a more serious situation, I think. Gradually people are going to realize that women have power too, and they can fight back. And actually, it's not just women that are victims of these kinds of things. Sometimes men are. I've had male clients that were sexually harassed by other males or by women.
This day and age, when so many women are coming forward, men and women, I should say, are coming forward with concerns about what's taking place in their workplace environment, what sorts of advice would you give people who are questioning, have I been wronged or am I just upset about something that I don't think was fair?
Well, there's a lot of things that people do that are wrong that the victim really can't do much about. And then the question comes, how bad is it? Sometimes when women complain about it, they get retaliated against and get terminated even for complaining about sexual harassment, or even just telling the guy that you need to leave me alone, I don't like that, or that kind of thing. So yeah, then they need to do something more about it.
As we've seen with legal filings and cases, it's often the most salacious allegations that dominate the headlines. And that's for journalists to decide how much detail to publish when they don't necessarily have all the facts. Susan Swanberg is a former attorney and teaches media law at the U of A School of Journalism. Here's what she had to say about the ethics that should drive these decisions. What's listed in a lawsuit or notice of claim, considered public record, public document, therefore fair game for the press.
Fair game for the press in that it's there to be reported on, but the press also needs to remember that those at that point are allegations and not necessarily the ultimate truth. You can use those documents as an initial source and then do some other footwork and find out what the people behind those allegations are reporting.
Oftentimes, lawsuits can have a lot of emotion behind them. So there are things in there that might not be relevant for the average person to know. But in newsrooms, we make that decision to go on ahead and publish it. What sorts of discussions take place when we're thinking about what's relevant, what's not?
The SPJ Ethical Code does help us. That's the Society of Professional Journalists. And there are 4 pillars of that code. One is to report the truth. Find and report the truth. Another is to act independently, and a third is to be accountable and accurate. The fourth is basically to avoid unnecessary harm, and again, I'm paraphrasing. And that gives us a lot of information. In other words, if you have, say, a vulnerable person, say the allegations perhaps focus on maybe a public figure, but also involve a child of that public figure, a vulnerable person who does not know how to interact in the legal journalistic world. Journalists are required to take extra care that they don't violate that person's privacy.
There are often very salacious things in lawsuits that are published, everyone else is doing it, and then maybe a case gets thrown out. Can we talk about defamation?
Well, yes, defamation is really a concern, and one of the concerns is it a public figure that you're speaking of a private party? But let's say those allegations involved another person who was not a public figure. Let's say there are salacious allegations of child abuse. You would want to take greater care with the victim, or with sexual harassment. You would want to take great care that if you expose the victim, that was with the victim's consent and agreement. So those are some of the issues that can pop up.
As journalists, we are tasked with a heavy duty.
Yes.
What are your words of advice for your students who are stepping into this world? And it's changing, especially with the advent of social media.
Well, you have to be fierce as a journalist and find the truth and report it, but you also need to minimize harm where it's appropriate. And I don't mean minimize harm if someone is corrupt and you're reporting on corruption, because of course it would harm someone for those to be exposed. I'm talking about harming the vulnerable, the people whose voices are not always heard, who could suffer harm. So I advise my students to get that information, but vet it within whatever organization you're working for.
Ethics, it seems, can mean different things for different folks. So who's really the gatekeeper?
That's a very good point, and I should note that the ethical code of which I spoke earlier, the Society of Professional Journalists, is not binding. It's advisory. Journalists do not have licenses as doctors and lawyers do, so there's no disciplinary process by which they can have a license removed. However, if you do not perform well in your job and you don't report accurately, there are consequences. Most journalists, I think, want to be ethical people. I think that we've taken a lot of slams recently that are undeserved. And I think part of discussions like this is it presents a good opportunity to reinforce the fact that ethics are important.
Ups and downs on Wall Street this week set off alarms in the media and led to more scrutiny on the stock market. The first significant dip came at the end of the trading week on February 2nd, and another steep drop kicked off this week. Chris Lamoureux, a finance professor at the U of A Eller College, told us how volatility this week fits into a bigger picture when it comes to investing.
Volatility in the market often is not associated with any volatility or concerns about the underlying economy. And so therefore, there's no reason to look at the recent stock market volatility and fear that that is indicative that something is wrong in the economy.
Volatility came into play when the stock market plunged for 2 consecutive trading days. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped more than 1,100 points on Monday. Lamoureux says it's important to put those losses into context.
So effectively, the 2-day drop from Friday and Monday erased about 6 weeks worth of gains from early December through the month of January, are perhaps actually what was more surprising. January of 2018 is an unusually strong month. The market was up over 6%. Professionals are aware that this fast run-up from December and January was probably something that was going to, at the very least, bring about some incremental volatility to markets.
My 401k retirement plan, should I be concerned at this point?
You never want to react to significant swings, either in the upside or the downside, in terms of your own personal financial planning. What you want to do is have a plan in place that is consistent with your goals in terms of retirement and your lifestyle, etc., and stick to that plan over time. You don't want to respond. People who, for example, saw the stock market running up over the last couple of months and decided to shift money in, those people are paying a price now.
What just occurred, as you said, can tell us something about the future. So what's about to happen?
Well, one thing we know has already happened, and that is that interest rates have started to rise. So an investor looking, do I invest in the stock market or do I invest in other types of securities, now has some real choices to make. 5 years ago, no one would have put their money into a treasury bill earning 1/20th of 1%. That was not a real attractive alternative. There's some indication in last week's job report that wages may be starting to rise. That often induces increased inflationary concerns. And so that will result ultimately in higher interest rates. That makes fixed income investments, such as bonds, relatively more attractive. And so it's not surprising, perhaps, that we see some heightened volatility.
One of the largest economic boosts for the state of Arizona happening in Tucson this week, the annual Tucson Gem and Minerals Show in its 64th year. Since its inception, other gem shows have populated the city, putting Tucson on the world's map.
Keep on coming around, come around, come around, come around.
Welcome to the first day of the 64th annual Tucson Gem and Minerals Show.
When we started, we were a novelty. It was a weekend show in the Helen Killing School. And the next year we went out to the Pima Fairgrounds, and the local people did support us. But what was also good was that dealers, people from outside who were in the mineral industry, were looking at us and saying, well, you know, they can put on a show, maybe we should go to Tucson.
That was 1955. In the 60s, another promoter rented a hotel and started his own show. Soon after that, jewelry, wholesale deals, and eventually the Smithsonian. By the 1970s, the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show began occupying half of the Tucson Convention Center. The subsequent result? Shows all over the region, 47 to be exact.
So it's been this snowball effect. Nobody planned it. Nobody envisioned it. I mean, when we started in 1955, honestly, all they wanted to do was to cover expenses. They were going to be happy if they covered expenses, which of course they did.
What's more is that the Tucson Gem and Mineral Society garnered the respect of gem and mineral enthusiasts all over the globe. World-class exhibits featuring private collections and displays. An event that's flourished over the years.
Maybe 1 or 2 more coppers in this pile of stuff. There's a lot of minerals in those boxes.
Gene Schlepp was there at the beginning.
Hi, guys. Welcome.
A teenager dabbling in minerals who won the first blue ribbon in 1955.
The one I got, the one from England, I really enjoy it. I enjoy the minerals, enjoy the people, and the camaraderie. And we have friends from all over the world. Hey, guy, how you doing?
A passion that grew. Schlepp, now in his 70s, went into the mineral business and to this day still shines at the show.
Things like this become part of your life when you do it.
That enthusiasm is what the Tucson Gem and Mineral Society and the City of Tucson want to keep here for decades to come.
We are blessed to have this. We are very fortunate. We are fortunate that we have become the world's largest show of its kind for gems. We have a responsibility to make sure that that is an experience that people continue to have. It's an opportunity in our hospitality community that is heavily relied upon throughout the year because it is crazy hot in the summertime. A little hard to drive in that tourist activity during summer. It's important.
Growing pains for an expanding downtown, necessary construction seemingly always happening, the city does this to keep up with change.
A lot of shows have operated on parcels that were vacant or really relied on parking on parcels that were vacant, whether they were owned by the city, the county, or by private ownership, and they would lease those and make arrangements to do that. As we have successfully redeveloped the downtown, we have seen a lot of those parcels disappear. We're going to have a situation in the future where a lot of that area may not be available, and that could impact some of those shows. So we are working with the county, with Visit Tucson, with our partners in the private sector, and now with the tribal nations to see what space will be available for these folks as we move into the future, because we certainly don't want to lose the shows.
So the city has upped its game with everything from shuttles to Sunlink and working with housing and businesses to grow what's available downtown.
Every chance that we can take, every opportunity that we can pursue to really keep the shows effective and easy to get to, easy to park, those are steps we're going to take.
Keeping this annual event while maintaining the culture of a big town. And as for the fear that every year might be the last?
Well, let me answer it this way. The Tucson Gem and Mineral Society owns the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show that we hold at the Tucson Convention Center. I don't think the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show is going to sound very good anywhere else.
Do it again and know that you can win this race. Know that she can.
In the last month, Arizona 360 has covered everything from NAFTA to Capitol Hill in the upcoming elections. All topics our next guest has had firsthand experience with as a representative of Arizona for more than 20 years. Here's my conversation with former Republican Congressman Jim Kolbe. You spent more than 20 years serving in the House. A lot has changed since you left. Can you talk about that dynamic that exists within the House and what you're seeing today? Are there any parallels?
Well, it has changed quite dramatically. Some of it was happening before I left Congress. You could begin to see some of the greater polarization that was taking place between the political parties, but it's accelerated tremendously. There used to be much more working across the aisle than there is today. There's still quite a bit of that goes on behind the scenes, but out in public, it's much more polarized. And I think there's several reasons for that. The most, I think, obvious reason is the whole redistricting process. Redistricting has become so sophisticated that it's possible to draw districts that are overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democrat, which means that people who are running for the congressional seats, aren't worried about what's going to happen to them in the general election, the fall election, where they may face somebody from the other party. They're only interested in what happens in the primary, and they have to cover their flank. So if they're Republicans, they have to kind of edge over towards the right. If they're Democrats, they edge over towards the left. And that just moves the political parties further away on the spectrum on either side. And I think that's had a tremendous effect on it and making it much more difficult for members to work together. A second thing is the rise of social media.
Sure.
No question about that. The social media, which is hardly a good way to do public policy in 140 characters, it has really contributed, I think, to the talk that we have and the fact that it's not very constructive. A third is certainly the fundraising, the amount of time that members have to spend doing fundraising, which is much greater than it used to be. And so they're like ants on a hot griddle. They're running faster and faster to raise the amount of money that they need to. And of course, they have to do it for every 2 years. I consider myself a conservative, but if I were in the House of Representatives today, they would not consider me a conservative Republican. I'm conservative on fiscal policy. I believe in a strong role on national defense and our leadership role in the world. And I'm for a free and open market and economy. Those seem to be things that the Republican Party has kind of turned away from in the last few years. And I'm hoping that we're going to come back and find our way again on those.
One of the former congressman's most notable achievements in office, helping to negotiate NAFTA more than 24 years ago. The deal between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada came together under Presidents George H.W. Bush. President Bill Clinton signed it into law in late 1993. Kolbe still considers it one of the most far-reaching trade agreements in the world. Were there talks back then about the possible negative repercussions to the United States economy and its labor force?
Of course. Most of the labor unions and organized labor opposed it at that time for that very reason, that it would be negative for the United States. I think facts have proven that not to be the case. But if you take agriculture, Mexico has become a huge export market for the United States, a huge market. 40% of all of our grain goes to Mexico. If we were to walk away from NAFTA, it would be devastating to our agriculture industry and to Midwestern states. So yes, it has been successful, but there certainly were elements that were talking about it then that were saying, no, we shouldn't do this because it's going to mean the loss of jobs in the United States. I don't think that's been the case.
24 years ago, I mean, should it be renegotiated now? Are there things that could be changed?
Yeah, absolutely. NAFTA does need to be modernized. There were things that didn't exist in those days, digital economy, for example. The irony is that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the one that was just negotiated last year and finished just before the election, but not signed, and which President Trump negated on the first day, his second day in office, did exactly that. It brought all of those things in to now a 12-nation membership that included not only Canada and Mexico, but Asian countries and some South American countries. So it modernized all of those things. It did those things. And unfortunately, we walked away from that. So the NAFTA renegotiation does have to take up those things and cover those. But we start with a good base of what we have, and we shouldn't throw that away.
The former congressman served Arizona's 8th congressional district from 1985 to 2007, before it was divided further to create CD2. We asked Kolbe what makes the district unique.
It's a different district than most of the others in Arizona, in that it is truly a competitive district. It's one of the few districts in the country that are actually competitive. I think the rate that they give, I forget which organization it is, lists only about 40 truly competitive districts out of 435 districts in the United States that are truly competitive. This is one of them. It can go Republican, as it has. It can go Democrat, as it has, and back to Republican. So it's a very competitive district, which I think means that the candidates have to kind of move a bit towards the center in order to appeal to the people that they're asking to vote for them.
While the future of NAFTA remains uncertain and bipartisanship in Congress is in decline, Kolbe remains optimistic about America's political future.
I'm hopeful about the future for this country. I think right now we're in a period of great dysfunction in Congress. I think we're in a period of polarization that we haven't seen in more than a century in this country. But I'm hopeful. I think the institutions are great, and I think they will pull us through this, and I think the American people have what it takes to do that.
And that's all for this week. If you have any feedback, send us an email, arizona360@azpm.org. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.